my name's Emmeline Tyler. I'm an avid reader and an obsessive library user. And today's video is about my top 10 books that I read in 2022. Now, all of these books, I got them from the library, apart from this one, Girl Next Door, which I got from my local street library. Most of these books, I heard about them online or from other people, and I reserved them, and so I usually go to the library like once a week to pick up reserves. Some say I have a problem. So let's get started. This book is called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. The subtitle is Time and How to Use It, and it's kind of like a productivity book, but it's also like an anti-productivity book. It's like has a philosophical and historical perspective on time and how our understanding of time that we currently have is very culturally specific, and how a lot of productivity gurus and time management experts don't really understand that. So I found it really interesting. So even though it is an anti-productivity guru book, it is actually really helpful in thinking about time and in using your time. So I really love that. Next up is If I Never Met You by Vaye McFarlane. Vaye McFarlane is one of my favourite authors. She writes romance novels, and I have this category, I've never heard anyone else call it this before, but I call it woke romance. So it's not like the old-fashioned Mills and Boons, not that I ever read those, but it's feminist and it has like current cultural references and it has interesting characters and it has consensual sex scenes. Not Vaye McFarlane, she doesn't have any explicit material, it's just a fade to curtain situation. Anyway, so this is about a woman, Laurie, whose partner of, I don't know, like 18 years or so, breaks up with her out of nowhere, and to get back at him, she fake dates their co-worker. Hilarity ensues. I love a good fake dating trope. So what I liked about this is kind of the feminism. So something that's really interesting about this is this dichotomy between men who say they're feminists or, you know, think that they love you versus men who actually see women as human. And so her ex is quite paternalistic and possessive of her even after he's broken up with her. Whereas the guy that she's fake dating, who all the men at the office say is a cad and a womanizer and a terrible guy, he's actually on her side and supports her through some really tough times and tough decisions that she makes. So I love that. If I Never Met You by Vaye McFarlane. Next up is I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness by Vaye Watkins. So I first heard about this author through a viral article that she wrote that was originally a speech called On Pandering, and it was all about how she's not writing to men anymore. And this is the first book she's published since that article, and or maybe just written since that article, and it is basically an anti-pandering book. It's about a woman who is she's just had a baby, she's struggling, she's probably got postpartum depression, and then she goes on what's supposed to be an overnight trip and ends up staying away for months, going on this romp, and she's like exploring, goes back to her hometown, she's looking into who she is, and then it has excerpts of her mother's letters that she wrote, so it's really going back through her own history and discovering herself. And it's also autobiographical fiction, which I had to look up, so I was like, is it real, is it not real? So that's an interesting category. Love this, I'm definitely going to buy this book and read it and loan it to people. Another book I'll definitely be reading again is Fleishman is in Trouble by Taffy Brodesser-Akner, published in 2019. It is also a book about a woman abandoning her children. So it's from the perspective of a recently divorced man, Toby Fleishman, whose ex-wife Rachel drops off the kids a few hours early and then just disappears for maybe weeks, and he has no idea where she is. So it cuts between him trying to cope with the logistics of the kids and what's happening in the moment, and him reflecting on his marriage and kind of like exploring ideas about the stories he's been telling himself about his marriage and whether they may or may not be true. And then there's a twist some part way through not exactly a twist, but a very interesting thing that happens in terms of narrative device, which really keeps the reader going. Me and a lot of other people who've read it. So that's Fleishman is in Trouble by Taffy, Brodesser-Akner. Next up, Idol by Louise O'Neill. This was published in 2022, and it is about an influencer. She's 40 years old. She has millions of followers on Instagram. She's just put out a new book, and to promote it, she publishes an article about a childhood sexual experience she had when she was a teenager with her best friend. And then her best friend actually writes in and says, well, like writes to her manager and says, that's not how I remember it, it wasn't consensual. So it's like, bum, bum, bum. And it's about cancellation, and it's about the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's really interesting as the book goes on. You get more drawn into her perspective, and for me anyway, I just started to trust her less and see her as more and more of an unreliable narrator. And then the end is like perfect. I loved it. Has like an explosive, very satisfying end. This book is See What You Made Me Do by Jess Hill. Power, Control and Domestic Abuse. She's an Australian journalist. I read this book when the defamation case was happening that was televised in like April, May of 2022, and I was quite distressed by it, but I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of it. So instead of learning more about what was actually happening, I decided to learn more about domestic abuse, and this book really helped. It came highly recommended. So because she's a journalist, she's not an expert, and she's not well, she probably is a feminist, but it's not from a feminist perspective, even though she includes feminist perspectives in the book. It's very objective and has a helpful overview. It's very hard to read. There is some graphic stuff in there, but she said that she didn't want to be euphemistic, but she also didn't want to be gratuitous, so she tries to tread that line, I guess. Highly recommend See What You Made Me Do. Next up, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. So it's a novel about a young woman who is really struggling with life. She has high anxiety and she just can't get stuff done. And I think it's coded that she has autism, that she's autistic. But that could be just because I'm autistic, and I think everyone else is too. Anyway, she gets a job working at a Catholic church as the admin officer, but she's also a lesbian and doesn't tell them she's a lesbian. But then she doesn't tell anyone in her life that she's working at a Catholic church, so she's living this double life. And meanwhile, her life just spins out of control because she can't get anything done, and the web of lies builds up, and then it all explodes at the end. But it has a happy ending. So I absolutely love this book, and definitely will be buying it so that I can loan it to people and reread it if I want to. Next up, Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. This is the first book that I've ever read that I know of that was written by a trans person. So it is about 3 people. So 2 people were trans women in a lesbian relationship, and they break up 3 years before this story starts. And the story is about the reason they break up is because one of them has a traumatic experience and then detransitions. So then he's referred to as he in the book, he accidentally gets his boss pregnant, who he's in a relationship with, and it's like super dysphoric for him. And so he says that he wants to keep the baby, like he wants to be a parent, but only if they can raise the baby with the 3 of them. Him, the mother, and his ex-girlfriend, who's always wanted to be a mother. So it's very interesting. So Torrey Peters has said that she didn't want the book to be like a lesson on how to treat trans people. And in fact, there's a couple of jokes in the book about how people get so scared of how to treat trans people, how to talk about trans people. And she just wanted it to be a good story, and it definitely is a good story, and I loved it for that. But it did teach me a lot as well. So I think I just want to read more books by trans people so that I don't have like a singular perspective, because I recognise that that's problematic. just to read one book by a trans person and be like, oh, that's the trans perspective, just like it is with any marginalised group. Next up, another book by Louise O'Neill, Asking for It, was published in 2015, and it is about an 18-year-old woman, Emma. She's in, I think, her second last or last year of school, and she's really annoying, not a nice person at all. She's very beautiful and she knows it, and she kind of uses her beauty to try to get ahead in the world, but at the same time she's just playing by the game, like according to the society that she's in, which is very male-centric because it's like the real world. And so the first half of it goes very slow, like day by day, and then something traumatic happens, and then the second half is like the fallout from that. It's a very dark book, very hard to read, but extremely well written and well worth reading. I'd put it in the same category as See What You Made Me Do in terms of like worth reading, but you need a lot of emotional energy for it. Last up, Girl Next Door by Alyssa Brugman. I'm very fond of this book because of how hard it was to find itself fit back into my hands. So I first read this in 2014, but then I could never read it again because I forgot the name of the book and the name of the author. But I remembered all these details about the book, and then one day I found it at the street library, and I didn't even know this was the book, but I picked it up because I recognised the author, and then when I got home I realised it was, and I was like so happy. So it's about a teenage girl, maybe 14 or 15, it's not clear, and she's from an upper middle class family, and then they fall on hard times because they overextend themselves in terms of debt, and they end up homeless, and it's like then they end up on a bit of a romp, just trying to like figure things out. Has a happy ending. But yeah, I really like this because it's a perspective that I haven't really come across before, like how people do end up homeless even if they come from quite a privileged background initially. And that's it. Thanks so much for listening. I hope this has inspired you to pick up some of these books, maybe put them on reserve at your own library. Okay, bye.